The night my world changed didn't come with thunder or warning. It arrived quietly, in the form of a phone call that ended a marriage and began a lifetime of survival. I remember standing in the kitchen, staring at the peeling paint on the wall while my husband's voice faded into distance. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply said, "I can't do this anymore." Then the line went dead, and just like that, so did the life I thought I had. In the next room, my son was asleep. He was 6 years old, small enough to still curl his fingers around mine, still innocent enough to believe that parents never leave. That night, I made a decision I never spoke out loud. He may have lost a father, but he will never feel abandoned. The following years were not kind. They didn't care about promises or strength or determination. They simply demanded more than I had to give and then asked for more. I worked wherever I could. Mornings started before sunrise at a diner where the smell of coffee soaked into my skin. By afternoon, I cleaned offices, empty spaces filled with other people's success. At night, I stocked shelves in a grocery store under fluorescent lights that made everything look tired, including me. But no matter how long the day was, I always came home the same way. Quietly. Carefully. So I wouldn't wake him. There were nights I stood by his bedroom door just watching him sleep. His chest rising and falling, his face peaceful, untouched by the weight I carried outside that room. Those moments kept me going. One evening, when he was about 8, he caught me staring. "Mom," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Why are you always watching me sleep?" I smiled, brushing his hair back gently. "Just making sure you're still here." He frowned, confused. Where would I go? I swallowed the answer that wanted to come out. People leave. That's what they do. Instead, I said softly, "Nowhere. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." From that day on, he started waiting for me. No matter how late I came home, I would find him pretending to be asleep, only to sit up the moment I entered. "Did you eat?" he would ask, his voice small but serious. Of course, I'd lie. He would study my face like he didn't believe me, then nod anyway. "Good. Because you always tell me not to skip meals." I used to laugh at that. Not because it was funny, but because somehow, my little boy had become my reminder to stay human. We didn't have much. There were months when I had to choose between paying the electricity bill and buying proper groceries. Winters were the hardest. I remember one particularly cold season when the heater stopped working and I couldn't afford to fix it. I told him it was an adventure. "Let's build a blanket fort," I said, layering every sheet and quilt we owned in the living room. His eyes lit up. "Like camping?" "Exactly like camping," I replied, hiding the tremor in my voice. We sat inside that makeshift shelter, wrapped in warmth we created ourselves. I read him stories until he fell asleep against my shoulder, his breath soft and steady. I stayed awake long after, listening to the wind press against the windows, promising myself that one day, he wouldn't have to live like this. And he didn't. Because I made sure of it. When he turned 16, he got his first part-time job. I didn't want him to work, I wanted him to focus on school, but he insisted. "I want to help," he said one evening, standing taller than I remembered. "You've done enough." I looked at him then, not as the little boy who needed me, but as the young man I had raised. "You don't owe me anything," I told him firmly. He shook his head. "I know. But I want to." That was the first time I realized something had changed. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was becoming someone with his own thoughts, his own choices, his own life. It scared me more than I expected. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I knew how the world worked. I knew how easily people could be influenced, how quickly love could be replaced, how fragile loyalty could become under the right pressure. Still, I said nothing. I let him grow. I let him make friends, chase opportunities, build dreams bigger than anything I had imagined for myself. And every time he succeeded, I felt a quiet pride settle in my chest. This is why I endured everything, I would think. This is why it was worth it. By the time he graduated college, he stood on a stage I never had the chance to stand on. As they called his name, I clapped harder than anyone in that auditorium, my hands trembling with emotion I couldn't contain. After the ceremony, he found me in the crowd. "I did it, Mom," he said, pulling me into a hug. "No," I whispered, holding him tighter than I meant to. "We did it." He laughed softly. "You always say that." "Because it's true." He pulled back, looking at me with a seriousness that caught me off guard. "Everything I am, it's because of you." For a moment, the world felt still. No struggles. No sacrifices. No long nights or empty days. Just that sentence. If life had ended right then, I think I would have been at peace. But life doesn't stop at happiness. It moves forward, quietly, steadily, until something shifts. And sometimes, you don't even notice the shift at first. It starts small. A missed call. A shorter conversation. A visit that gets postponed, then forgotten. At first, I told myself it was normal. He was busy. He had responsibilities now. A career. A future. But deep down, something felt different. Something I couldn't explain. One evening, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same one where I had counted coins and planned survival years ago, I stared at my phone, waiting for it to ring. It didn't. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Not exhaustion. Not worry. But distance. The kind that doesn't happen overnight. The kind that builds quietly, until one day, you realize the person you held closest is no longer within reach. I didn't know it then. But that distance had a name. And soon, I would meet her. I met her on a Sunday afternoon that felt too calm to carry consequences. He had called earlier that morning, his voice lighter than it had been in weeks. "Mom, I want you to meet someone," he said, almost casually, but I heard the excitement beneath it. I paused, my hand tightening slightly around the phone. "Someone?" I asked, though I already knew what that meant. He laughed softly. "Yeah, her name is Emily. We've been seeing each other for a while." For a moment, I said nothing. Not because I wasn't happy, but because something inside me shifted, quietly, like a door opening to a room I hadn't prepared for. "That's wonderful," I replied, steadying my tone. "I'd love to meet her." We agreed on lunch at my place. I spent the entire morning preparing, more nervous than I cared to admit. I cleaned corners that didn't need cleaning, rearranged things that were already in place, and cooked dishes I hadn't made in years. It wasn't about impressing her. It was about not losing my place. When they arrived, I noticed her immediately. She was beautiful in a way that didn't ask for attention, it assumed it. Her posture was perfect, her smile controlled, her eyes observant. She stepped into my home like she belonged anywhere she chose to be. "Mrs. Carter," she said, extending her hand gracefully. "I've heard so much about you." I smiled, shaking her hand. "I hope it was all good." She tilted her head slightly, her smile widening just enough. "Of course." My son stood beside her, watching the exchange with quiet anticipation, as if waiting for approval. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "You're both just in time." Lunch started well. Conversation flowed easily, at least on the surface. She spoke about her work, her upbringing, her interests. Everything was polished, precise, almost rehearsed. "She's amazing, Mom," my son said at one point, his eyes lighting up as he looked at her. "You should see how she handles things at work. Everyone respects her." "I can tell," I replied, glancing at her briefly. She smiled again, but this time, there was something behind it. Not unkind. Not rude. Just measured. "And you?" she asked, turning her attention to me. "What do you do now?" The question was simple. Ordinary. But the way she asked it made it feel like something else. "I've worked different jobs over the years," I said calmly. Right now, I'm managing things at home. She nodded, as if processing information. That must have been difficult, raising him on your own. It was, I said, meeting her gaze. But it was worth it. For a second, something flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident, but something stayed with me long after they left. It wasn't anything she said. It was how she said it. Carefully. Strategically. Like someone who understood the weight of words, and used them accordingly. At first, I ignored the feeling. I told myself I was being protective, maybe even unfair. After all, my son was happy. That should have been enough. And for a while, it was. He called regularly. He visited when he could. He still laughed the same way, still shared small details about his day. But slowly, things began to change. It didn't happen all at once. It started with shorter calls. Hey, Mom, I can't talk long. Emily and I are heading out. Then missed visits. Something came up. We'll reschedule, okay? Then explanations that sounded rehearsed. You know how things are, work's been busy, we're trying to manage everything. I listened. I understood. I didn't complain. But I noticed. One evening, after weeks of brief conversations, I asked him to come over for dinner. Just the two of us. He hesitated. Can Emily come too? He asked. I paused. I was hoping to spend some time with you alone. There was silence on the line. Then, gently, she might feel left out. The words settled heavily in my chest. She's not your mother, I said, more firmly than I intended. I know that, he replied quickly. But she's important to me. Important. The word echoed in my mind long after the call ended. Of course she was important. I wasn't asking him to choose. But somehow, it already felt like he had. When they visited together again, the dynamic had shifted. Subtly. Almost invisibly. But enough. He watched her before answering questions, as if checking for alignment. He laughed more at her jokes than he used to. He deferred to her opinions in ways he never had before. And she observed everything. She noticed where I placed things, how I spoke, what I cooked, how I reacted. Nothing escaped her attention. Don't you think it's time to update this place? She said one evening, glancing around the living room. I looked up. What do you mean? It just feels dated, she replied lightly. A fresh start could be good. My son nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe we could help you redo a few things. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. I like it the way it is. She tilted her head again, that same controlled gesture. Of course. It's just a suggestion. But it didn't feel like one. It felt like the beginning of something else. The more time passed, the more her presence expanded. Not just in his life. But in ours. She started speaking for him. He's been really stressed lately. He doesn't have time this week. We've already made plans. We. Always we. As if the space between us had been filled, and I was no longer part of it. One night, after another cancelled visit, I called him again. Is everything okay? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, Mom, he said quickly. Why wouldn't it be? You've been distant, I said. I just wanted to make sure you're all right. There was a pause. Then, softly, you're overthinking things. Maybe I was. Or maybe I was watching something slip away, piece by piece. I just miss you, I admitted. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm still here, he said. But it didn't feel true. Not anymore. Because being present isn't the same as being close. And somewhere between his new life and the woman standing beside him, I had begun to disappear. I didn't know it then. But this wasn't just distance. This was the beginning of division. And soon, it wouldn't be silent anymore. The first time she raised her voice at me, it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind that starts without tension and ends with everything changed. They had come over for dinner again, at his insistence this time, not mine. He said it would be good for us to spend time together, to clear the air, though I hadn't realized there was anything left to clear. I had cooked his favorite meal. Not out of habit, but hope. For a while, things felt almost normal. He talked about work, she listened with interest, adding comments here and there. I stayed quiet more than usual, observing the space between us, trying to understand where I still fit. Then it shifted. It always started small. I don't think this is healthy, she said suddenly, setting her fork down with quiet precision. I looked up. What do you mean? She leaned back slightly, folding her hands in her lap. This dynamic. My son frowned. Emily. No, she interrupted gently, but firmly. It needs to be said. I turned my attention fully to her now, my patience steady, though something inside me tightened. Go on, I said. She met my gaze without hesitation. You're too involved in his life. The words landed cleanly, without emotion. As if she had practiced them. I'm his mother, I replied, keeping my tone calm. And he's an adult, she countered. There needs to be space. My son shifted in his seat. She doesn't mean it like that, Mom. I didn't look at him. Then how does she mean it? Emily sighed softly, as though explaining something obvious. You depend on him emotionally. It puts pressure on our relationship. I felt a flicker of disbelief. Not anger. Not yet. Depend? I repeated. I raised him alone. I supported him through everything. That's not dependence, that's family. She nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without agreeing. And now it's time to let go. The room fell quiet. I turned to my son then, expecting anything from him. He hesitated. Just for a second. But that second told me everything. Mom, maybe she has a point, he said carefully. Something inside me broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to be felt. I see, I whispered. Dinner ended soon after that. Not with a resolution, but with silence. The kind that fills a room long after people have left. But it didn't stop there. That night marked a shift I could no longer ignore. Calls became rare. Visits stopped entirely. Messages were brief, distant, almost formal. Every attempt I made to reach him felt like an intrusion rather than connection. And then, one evening, it all came to a head. I hadn't heard from him in over 2 weeks. No calls. No messages. Nothing. So I did what any mother would do. I went to see him. When I arrived, the house looked different. Not physically, but in a way I couldn't explain. Like something inside it had been rearranged. I knocked on the door. For a moment, there was no response. Then it opened. He stood there, surprised. Not angry. Not happy. Just unprepared. Mom, he said. What are you doing here? I was in the area, I replied, though it wasn't entirely true. I thought I'd stop by. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before stepping aside. Come in. As I entered, I noticed her immediately. She was sitting on the couch, composed as always, watching the scene unfold with quiet awareness. Hi, she said, her tone neutral. Hello, I replied. The tension was immediate. Unspoken, but undeniable. I didn't know you were coming, she added. I didn't think I needed permission, I said, more sharply than I intended. My son stepped in quickly. Let's not start anything. I'm not starting anything, I said. I just wanted to see my son. And you have, Emily replied calmly. But we have plans tonight. I turned to him again. Plans? He nodded, avoiding my eyes.
Yeah.
We're heading out soon. I stood there, feeling like a guest in a place I once belonged. I won't take long, I said quietly. I just wanted to talk. Emily stood up then, smoothing her dress as she moved closer. I think it's better if you don't, she said. I looked at her, the calm in her voice only making the words sharper. Excuse me? She met my gaze directly. Every time you come here, it creates tension. It's not healthy for him. Or for us. My hands clenched slightly at my sides. I'm his mother. And I'm his partner, she replied. We're building a life together. We need boundaries. The word again. Boundaries. As if love required distance. As if connection needed limits. I turned to my son, my voice softer now. Is this what you want? He didn't answer immediately. That hesitation, it cut deeper than anything she had said. Mom, he began, his tone conflicted. Things have been difficult lately. For who? I asked. For all of us, he said. I shook my head slowly. No. For me, it's been clear. I'm losing you. That's not true, he insisted. Then why does it feel like I have to ask permission to see my own child? I replied. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. Then Emily spoke again. It doesn't have to be like this, she said. But something has to change. I looked at her, already knowing what was coming. And what exactly are you suggesting? She didn't hesitate. That he chooses. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. My breath caught, just for a moment. I turned to him, my heart steady despite everything. You don't have to answer that, I said quietly. But he did. Because she was watching. Because the silence demanded it. Because something had already been decided long before this moment. I think, it's best if we take some space, he said. Space. Such a small word. For something so permanent. I nodded slowly, absorbing it without reaction. All right, I said. He looked relieved. That hurt more than anything. I'll call you, he added quickly. I managed a faint smile. You don't have to. I turned and walked toward the door, each step heavier than the last. No one stopped me. No one followed. And just like that, I was outside. Alone. The night air felt colder than it should have. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, waiting for something, anything, to change. It didn't. That was the moment I understood. I hadn't just been pushed away. I had been replaced. And the worst part wasn't her. It was him. Because in the end, he chose her. And that night, I lost my son.